Sebastian Braun, I'm the CEO of 24i. Traditionally, if I ask most that may know 24i, who's 24i, you might say the app guys, but the reality is the sugar behind our beautiful apps is a excellent content management system and data. Lots of data about content, lots of data about consumption, the audience, users, and we'll talk about how we translate that into advanced advertising.
How have advertisers' needs changed over the past couple of years in the face of, shift of changing consumer habits and industry shifts, and how are you helping customers or your advertisers?
For those of you that were here for that presentation before, there was an interesting data point where I think the data point was 58% of advertising is still consumed traditionally on linear channels and obviously through Nielsen reporting, etc. And I couldn't agree more. I think the reality is the buyer has, coming from the digital side, much more demand for what happens actually after the ad is consumed. Was it the right ad? Can we prove where that customer went after that? We have the ability to do interactive advertising, especially on connected devices. So I think that whole ecosystem is a big, huge change. Still takes some time, I think, for a lot of the buyers to adapt to that and change their processes and change their organizations around that. But I think it's interesting to see the digital landscape make that entry into what linear still kind of dominates, but definitely I think we're grabbing more and more inventory in that space.
Someone mentioned first-party data earlier, but you mentioned a couple different kinds of data. How does this all play together? Advertiser first-party data, publisher first-party data, third-party data, platform data. How does that tie together? How does that work? And ultimately, what's useful for what?
A lot more complexity in terms of really defining the audience segments very well, right? There's, I think you mentioned, sensor panel-based sensor level data is sort of very broad, versus now we're actually able, based on user consent and consumption behavior and so on, to define many more very nuanced audience segments, and then articulating that value of all of these individual segments to the buyer has become much more complex. And I think data quality, like you're just talking about, is hugely critical to really put a value against the inventory that you have for a particular segment. So we've actually made a lot of investment, be a little bit technical here for a second, but to look at how do we take audience behavior, consent data, and add that to an ad call in an IAB format, for example. And what does that mean? And how many segments of audience on a particular service can we actually go define with all of these attributes? And it's almost like a personalization engine behind the content, but it becomes a personalization engine for the ad space as well. So I think the complexity is increasing, and with that complexity, the data quality that we show up with, describing the audience, that's really, really hugely critical for us.
How do AI-enhanced tools and analytics actually aid in supporting ad personalization? I know Rohan talked about fusion algorithms that are, appending additional data, are using AI then to help make sense of all this, help match things a little bit more, find weird little correlations that drive performance.
Yeah, I think just to go a little bit into the operational aspect of it too, what's interesting to us is using AI, for example, figuring out when is the right time to show an ad. Is it really at this time for this particular user? How can we go analyze the video stream and look at cue point tuning, for example, using AI? Is this the right time to do an interruption? What type of creative needs to be served right now? Is sort of an interruption of the content the right thing? Is it an overlay? Is it an action-driven interaction that we want the consumer to take? It all goes back to the goals of the advertiser too, right? One of the things I actually kind of was thinking about before when you guys were talking about the value to the ad buyer, it goes back to what are their goals, right? I think census level data, great if you're running a brand campaign. If you're running something for conversion where you actually expect an output, an outcome afterwards, I think when you go down into the personalized individual user level, that's a different type of data set, a different type of operation there, and that's where things like AI to help us ascertain where's the right cue point to run this ad and catch that user. I think that's where AI is starting to be used quite a bit, but in the future I expect it to shine quite well in that area. What we've done is we've developed some attribution technology for our customers to understand, okay, where are we getting the best bang for our buck for customer acquisition. And I was just kind of hearing you talk about that. It's also, well, we can use that information for an advertiser to say, this customer originally was acquired on an Instagram reel, for example, then went into the service. We carry that knowledge through and then overlay that to the ads that they're actually seeing while they're in the session on one of our customer services. And that allows us, I believe, to be even more specific about what type of ad, what type of, again, whether it's a brand ad or a conversion-focused ad in that sense, is working well based on where that customer, where that viewer has been acquired from.
One final question, but again, backtracking a little bit, just focusing on the advertisers. How are they defining success today in streaming?
I think it depends on the goals of the campaign. Is it a brand campaign? You're going back to maybe impressions and reach and frequency, and what does it take for me to get the recall when that person finds themselves near that product or near that brand that I'm trying to create awareness for. Versus if you are looking at performance, then you're much more interested in where does this viewer come from? How is that viewer performing? Where am I seeing the conversion? And you're looking more lower in the funnel at the conversion metrics, at the true ROI that I'm getting out of that campaign. So I think it all starts with well-defined goals for the campaign from the advertiser side, and then depending on those goals, figuring out what are the KPIs. So I wouldn't say there's sort of one set of KPIs that fits all, but it really depends on what the goals of the campaign are.